Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another Overwatch League fan thoughts and analysis video. Today, we are finally going over the season playoffs. The 8 teams that will be competing for a shot at winning the grand finals in Philadelphia have been determined. We finally have our top 8. Before we look, though, at our top 8, let's talk about what happened this past weekend at the play-in tournament in Los Angeles. Now, as you can see here, my picks, I've updated the bracket to accurately reflect what has happened, but as you can see, we did have the Guangzhou Charge beat the Chengdu Hunters, as most people predicted, and myself included, but the Philadelphia Fusion were unable to defeat the Shanghai Dragons. So I did not get that game correct. As we move into round 2, the London Spitfire were able to defeat the Shanghai Dragons and lock up their spot in the season playoffs. The Spitfire vs. Dragon series was one of, if not the best series that has happened all year, if not ever in the Overwatch League. It was an incredible series. Went to 8 maps. The first match in the Overwatch League to ever go to 8 maps. It was crazy. It was insane. But the London Spitfire ended up walking away with the victory there. In the 8-9 matchup, the Seoul Dynasty versus the Guangzhou Charge, the Seoul Dynasty were able to pull up a pretty convincing victory. They looked very good against the Guangzhou Charge. Surprisingly, I think everyone kind of expected the Charge to get in. There was a poll that the Overwatch League Twitter account ran. Which of the 4 teams do you think has the best chance of making into the season playoffs? Most people said London. The second most was Guangzhou. The third most was Shanghai. And Seoul was by far the least favorite to get into the season playoffs. But they won convincingly against the Charge. It was a very good win for the Dynasty. They looked good. Marvel looked really good on the Sigma. They had Michelle playing Orisa. It was a very interesting way to play. Fitz was crazy good. Fitz is one of the most underrated players in the league, I think. He's really, really good. He does his job really, really well. So I think that is something that really, going forward, should be looked at in terms of one of the players in the league who really has had a huge impact on his team, but has done so pretty quietly. So the London Spitfire and the Seoul Dynasty. Moving on to the second leg, which is the actual season playoffs. So let's take a look at the bracket as it is now. As you can see, we have round 1, the quarterfinals. The Vancouver Titans are number 1 seed, taking on the Seoul Dynasty, the number 8 seed. The number 4 seeded Hangzhou Spark taking on the number 5 seeded LA Gladiators. The number 2 seeded New York Excelsior taking on the number 7 seeded London Spitfire. And the number 3 seeded San Francisco Shock taking on the number 6 seeded Atlanta Reign. Some interesting stuff I wanted to kind of point out. One of the things I found really interesting is that when this was first announced at the beginning of the season, there would be a play-in tournament at the end of Stage 4 to get into the season playoffs. The thing that a lot of people said was, what's really good about this is you have the chance for a team like a Guangzhou Charge, who's really hot at the end of the season, who's playing the best Overwatch at that point in the season. It's a really good way to get some of these teams that actually look like they deserve to compete for a championship to get in. And that's why I think a lot of people expected the Guangzhou Charge to get in. Stage 4, they were really good. They lost 1 match all of Stage 4, if I remember correctly. I believe they only lost 1 match. It was to London. So they looked like a really good team. They looked really solid. They looked ready to have a really, really, really good run into the playoffs. And they were stopped by the Seoul Dynasty, who are the 8 seed. And then we had the London Spitfire, number 7 seed, get in. And I think it's funny that at the end of the day, through all of it, right, the Seoul Dynasty had been pretty uneventful in the way they played. They were very kind of boring to watch. They were a good team. I mean, at the beginning of the season, I had them as number 5 on my power rankings. Like, I thought the Seoul Dynasty looked like a really good team. And a lot of that came down to a lot of this new talent they had. They had Fissure as their main tank. They still had Fleta as their DPS. And, it was kind of a thing of, do we really expect the Seoul Dynasty to struggle at all? And this is a team that has had basically 2 rosters for 3 stages. For Stage 1 and Stage 2 and Stage 3, they kept just rotating their roster. And they would have, Ryu Jaehong and Jexa, but then they would have Toby, and they just kept changing up the roster. And it looks like finally they have settled on a roster they like, with Fitz and Fleta, Michelle and Marvel, and then Jaehyung and Toby. It looks like they finally settled on a roster that they like. Who knows if they already knew what roster they liked, but it was an interesting team to watch. But they were not that impressive to watch. They weren't really an exciting team to watch. I mean, a couple times it's some really exciting matches. The one against Dallas Fuel comes to mind where Toby had like 6 boops off the bridge on Eichenwald. But in general, this is a team that was never super exciting, or they didn't really like fire you up as a watcher of the league. They just didn't really have that kind of fun, exciting play. But here they are. They looked very good against Guangzhou. They looked more exhilarating and more interesting as a team to watch. And at the end of the day, when all is said and done, the 8 best teams in the league proved why they were the 8 best teams in the league. And all of the 8 best teams in the league by record and differential made it into the season playoffs. So I think that's really interesting. I don't expect that to be a trend that continues on. If a play-in tournament is something that we still get going forward, which I think it will be. I think it's a really good idea. But also, if you're not doing stages, do you really need it? It's interesting. It's an interesting idea. But obviously, there's the bracket. The Titans versus the Dynasty, the first match, of course. That's a very interesting match. The Titans, of course, have been juggernauts of this league. The Seoul Dynasty have been unable to beat the Titans. I don't think really the Dynasty should be expected to win this match. Obviously, it is a double elimination bracket, so even if they do lose to the Titans, they're not guaranteed to be out of the playoffs. But it's an interesting match. I think the matchup you really need to look out for is the DPS matchup. At the end of the day, obviously, if there's something that you need to take away from the play-in tournament, it's this very interesting Doomfist Reaper Orisa play that we've been seeing, and it's very interesting. Sideshow talked about it a lot during the actual halftime and whatnot. But it's really interesting. So what you see is the Orisa will halt the enemy team, and the Doomfist will come through and try to get a pick on the halt. And the enemy Doomfist, a lot of the time, will then try to retaliate to that punch with their own punch and see if they can get the pick on that Doomfist. All the while, the Reapers go into the enemy backlines for both teams and just try to get a pick on one of the supports, and then they fade away, and then they do it again. It makes more sense if you see it, visualized. But it's a really interesting thing to see. And at the end of the day, we know that the Vancouver Titans have really good DPS players, but we don't know how good they are necessarily on Reaper Doomfist. We haven't really seen a ton of Reaper Doomfist from them. That was really that made you have a lot of faith in the way that team would play. The tank matchup is really important. How Janu and Bumper can play the Orisa Sigma is very important. Symmetra is obviously also something that we could see get some play time. We didn't see a ton of Symmetra, so I don't know if we'll see a lot of it. Pharo is pretty big, so there's a lot of variables that go into this meta in general. But the Titans and Dynasty, I think the DPS matchup is the most important thing there. Spark and Gladiators will be an interesting one. The Gladiators have not looked all that great recently, or the Spark have been looking pretty good. And obviously these teams have had some time to practice, and they haven't had to worry about a play-in tournament, so they've had that extra week where they have been able to just practice. This is the one that I'm really interested in seeing how this one goes. It's a pretty even matchup, I think. So I'm interested to see how it goes. You'll be seeing my picks very shortly. I should mention that. I want to just kind of talk about the matches on the surface real quick, and then I'm going to show you guys my whole bracket at the end. New York Excelsior versus London Spitfire. London looked really good to start the series against Shanghai. Looked a lot weaker towards the end of the series, but they pulled off the victory, so that's what matters more. NYXL haven't looked all that great recently. Who knows if they're sandbagging or not? Who knows if they've been putting in a lot of time to prepare for this patch? We really can't have any idea until we see this team playing, but this will be an interesting matchup. Finally, Shock versus Reign, the matchup that I think is by far the best matchup in round one. The San Francisco Shock look really, really good. The Atlanta Reign look really, really good. Any of these teams could be a dark horse to go all the way and win the whole season. That's how good these teams are. This is a really great matchup. I'm really interested in seeing how this one goes. So those are your matchups. Those are kind of my thoughts on each of the matchups. But let's go into my picks. Let's go into my bracket. Obviously, it's a double elimination bracket, so you have matches that can go a team could lose and they're not necessarily out. But here is a look at my predicted bracket. Now, I think this is the way it's going to go. And that's just based on what I've seen so far and all that kind of stuff. So this bracket is something I will be revisiting every so often. Every week, obviously, I'm going to be making more of these videos each week. So I'll have a live look at the bracket each week. And I'll do an updated version of the bracket. But I'm going to show this bracket at the beginning of each video going forward. And we'll talk about what happened there. But as you can see, for the 4 matches that we know for a fact are happening in Week 1, I'm picking the Vancouver Titans over the Seoul Dynasty, the Hangzhou Spark over the LA Gladiators, the London Spitfire over the New York Excelsior, and the San Francisco Shock over the Atlanta Reign. So that would open up then the losers matches, where I have the Seoul Dynasty beating the LA Gladiators beating the Seoul Dynasty, and the Atlanta Reign beating the New York Excelsior. For my semifinals, I have the Titans over the Spark and the Shock over the Spitfire, which moves the Spark and the Spitfire into losers bracket. Down there, I have the Spitfire beating the Gladiators and the Reign beating the Spark. So they have a matchup in the losers round 3, where I'm picking the Spitfire over the Reign. The San Francisco Shock over the Vancouver Titans for the winners finals, which sets up a matchup between the London Spitfire and the Vancouver Titans in the losers finals, which I'm picking the Vancouver Titans. And in the grand finals, I have the San Francisco Shock over the Vancouver Titans. I don't really see a matchup that isn't that. The London Spitfire could make it all the way. I think they have looked really good. I think just based on what we've seen, we've gotten to see them this meta, so it's a lot easier to kind of pick them because we've seen stuff out of them. The Atlanta Reign, though, are definitely a threatening team. I really think the Atlanta Reign could make a really deep run potentially into the grand finals, depending on the path that's in front of them. But it's going to be tough, I think, for a lot of these teams. I'd actually be surprised if it did end up being Shock Titans. It's obviously it's the best of the best teams right now, and while the Vancouver Titans are, arguably the best team all season, and the San Francisco Shock are arguably the best team all season, obviously it gets difficult, especially if you get knocked into the losers bracket, because obviously, as my thing goes, one of those teams will end up in the losers bracket, right? That's a guarantee. Either the Titans or the Shock, one of them will be in the losers bracket, which means that they could have to play a really strong team that's not playing so well. A team like New York, right? I picked New York to lose in 2 games. I picked them to be out after 2 games. But if they take their first match against London and say they lose it, and they really, really kind of learn from it and adapt and just start looking really good, they're a really dangerous team. New York has only played San Francisco once this season, and they beat them 4-0. Now, that was stage 1. The Shock looked good in the match, but New York looked better. I think now the matchup would definitely favor the Shock, but I think you have to really consider that there is going to be at least one team in this bracket who surprises everybody, has a really good run. Maybe not a winners finals or grand finals run, but a good run, right? Maybe they make it to the semifinals, lose to the Titans or the Shock, and then go through losers, and they make it to losers finals, and take it the distance against the Titans or the Shock or something like that. You never really know. It's something that's gonna be really interesting to watch. But this is my bracket prediction. If you want to do your own, you can go to gigabrain.slmn.io/bracket, and you can make your own there. But this is the bracket as you can see it. I'm really interested in seeing where this whole playoff goes. What I'm curious about, what I think is interesting, is in the event that, say, the Vancouver Titans make it into losers finals, right? And they make it into grand finals after being in the losers bracket. So they make it to grand finals. And they beat the San Francisco Shock. Is there a second game? Because then San Francisco Shock wouldn't be double eliminated. Then it would be a single elimination for the Shock, right? So I'm hoping that grand finals, in the event that you get into grand finals as the winner and you lose game 1, is there a game 2? Because if not, then the person who wins winners finals can lose 1 game on the whole thing and be not crowned the champion. I just think it would be unfair. So I don't know what the deal with that is. I guess we'll figure out as we get closer to grand finals, but that's interesting to me. It'll be an interesting playoff. I'm really excited to watch it. I think it'll be a really interesting series to start off the playoffs with the Shock and the Reign and the Titans of the Dynasty. Those are two series I think will be really good. I'm excited to get into the playoffs. So they begin this weekend. I think they start Thursday, like they normally would. So I'm excited. Get ready for that because I think these playoffs are going to be really, really good. But that is everything that I have for you today. If you enjoyed, consider liking and subscribing because it really does help out a lot with the channel. But I'm going to get out here. Until next time, hope you all have a great day. Thank you for watching once again. Comment, like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff if you enjoyed. And I'll see you all next time. Bye.